Hello everyone, welcome again to another series of video from Electronics Eternity. This will be the continuation of our LCD videos. So this time around I will be speaking about LCD touchscreen, right? As you can aware, in the past videos we have tried to understood how the LCD behave, how its processor interprets information, how we can create circles, rectangles, lines, and so on, right? So this time we'll be looking at touchscreen. Before we dive into touchscreen, I just want to say that there are no specific, based on what I could find at least, right? So I couldn't find any specific data sheet which speaks particularly about touchscreen. This touchscreen code and whatever understanding I have developed is based on my experimentation alone, right? It could be right, it could be wrong, but nevertheless, I have established an understanding on how this LCD touchscreen works, and based on that, I can, I can create a program or manipulate certain inputs and output to produce a desired situation, right? So with that being said, let's go into the touchscreen code. In the first part of the code, we can see that I have defined few pins. So these pins are basically the pins that is connected to the LCD membranes. We have the top membranes and we have the bottom membranes, and these two membranes, let me show the pictures, right? Let's just say this is the top membrane, right? And on the other hand, we have this is as the bottom membrane. So those pins which I have defined in my program just now will be connected to this X1 and X2. What it does is it sends 5 volt, or it sets a pin to ground, so that we have a difference in terms of this two top sorry this two how do I say, levels, right? So over here it's 5 volt, over here it's ground, and any voltage reading in between that will give us a sort of a coordinate or a voltage reading. So based on that voltage reading, we would know where are we, right? I will show what does this actually means, right? So for now, just try to understand that LCD displays have two membranes. One is at the top, and another one is at the bottom. Whenever we touch or we pinch a point in the LCD screen, it creates a certain resistance, right? So for an example, let's just say this is 5 volt over here and this is ground. So if I touch this point, probably my voltage would be somewhere around 4 volts, right? As I progress further and further, probably if I touch here it might be 1, if I touch here it might be 0, something like that. So these layers have some resistive materials, and then therefore, depending on how much resistive material in contact, it will produce a certain reading. Okay, so there are a lot of like materials about how touchscreen works, so I'm not gonna go too deep into that because that is pretty much well known. So if you need to understand how LCD screen works in terms of its resistive material and how it reduces a certain coordinate, you can always check it out in Google or even in YouTube videos, right? So that explains why I have these four pins. So these four pins are basically my Y1, X1, Y2, X2. Okay, so in which I will manipulate later to set probably this to 5 volt and this to ground, high and lows, like that. All right. So this is the usual command that I have explained in detail in my first LCD tutorial. So I'm just retaining that, and I'm not going to explain much on that. The same with void LCD initialization. I'm going to just run the initialization before I do anything. and I'm defining some variables over here. It's 2 byte information, row digital, column digital. Okay, so here I'm initiating a serial begin, and then next is LCD initialization. Okay, now so let's start to look into void loop, right? So void loop, we have like two parts of the code. So let me just uncomment this, and I'll comment the bottom one just so that we could see what each part of the command does, right? So the first one, basically what it does is it sets pin Y1 to input, and then it sets the pin X1 and X2 to output. If we could remember the picture that we saw earlier, whether in top or bottom membrane, we have X1 and X2, so that we could set one to high and another one to low, one to VCC and one to ground. So that is just the purpose of X1 and X2, and accordingly we are writing X1 high and X2 low. These two orientation doesn't actually matter, but the value that the analog value which will be produced might differ, right? So it's just a matter of orientation, right? So you have to change this according to what you need. So feel free to experiment these values by changing it and swapping it. Okay, so then we'll have analog read, which is this pin. So I'm going to, okay, I'll comment this line first, just so that you could see what's the actual reading is, and then later I'll show what happens when you map these values. All right, so analog read, and then followed by digital read, and we have all this value displayed in the serial monitor, right? So let's try to upload this command. Done uploading. So let's see. So now you can see, let me just touch this point. Okay, right now you can see that the value is 100. Okay, so as I go higher, you can see the value increases, and I go higher, and notice at this point a digital row changed from 0 to 1, right? I'm not sure what's the relationship, but in between this point it changes from 0 to 1, and as I go higher, and then when I reach the end, it will then produce some value around 800. Okay, so it's right now it's around 700 something. Okay, so by knowing this behavior and how much the value changes in terms of the analog read, you can then manipulate the, how do I say, you can then manipulate your code, or you can create your code in such a way that it takes into account this voltage reading and also the digital changes from 0 to 1 and 1 to 0. Okay, so that is how my LCD processor behaves. Now let me show you what happens when I uncomment this line, and then I'll just upload that. So okay, now it's done uploading, so let's see what the value. So this value now starts with 10, right? So 3, so it's supposed to start with 0 ideally, but it's okay, still a good number. So as we go higher up, all the way up, I'm going to have my numbers until 240, right? You can see somewhere around that 240 starts with, then starts with 8 or 7. Okay, so this is just mapping these values into meaningful numbers, because the resolution is, I have 240 by 320. So 240 is basically my rows, right? How many number of rows that I could have in terms of coordinates. Okay, so I'm just changing this value into a much more usable format, so that I can use it along all other Arduino functions that I have developed. For example, if you could recall, drawing lines, drawing circle, rectangles, colors and everything, it is all based on coordinates of 0 to 240 or 0 to 320. So it's just mapping these values to a meaningful format. That's it. So that's what this particular line does, right? So now, okay, so that explains about this line. So now let's try to comment this one, and let's uncomment the one at the bottom. So the only difference is this is for rows and this is for column. It's that simple. Okay, I have uploaded that, and now let's see the values. So it starts with 300. Let me see what happens when I touch over here. So it's from 0 to 1, and then as I progress to the right a bit, it increases to 90, 100, and let's see what happens. You see at this point the same thing happens. From 0, the digital column changed to 1, 0 to 1. So take note of this behavior, and then you can program your code accordingly, right? So it goes up all the way to 320. Okay, so it's the exact same concept. As you can see, the digital reading changes from 0 to 1 when it reaches a certain point, and also you need to know what analog reading that you get horizontally and also vertically, so that you could you have an understanding about your touchscreen. So once you have this understanding, then you can develop a code which then detects a touch. For an example, like if you have digital column equals to 1 and the column is less than 500, sorry, is more than 500, that means it is detecting a touch in the upper quadrant of the LCD touchscreen, right? So basically, by doing this experimenting and exploring a bit, you'll get to know how your LCD behave. All right, so I guess that's about it. There's nothing much more in this code. So this does basically to give you an idea about how this touchscreen functions and what are the readings and how it changes. All right, so I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until then.